And welcome back to the start of Bright Lights and Bumblebee by the Brightbriar. So I didn't explain why I was doing this one first, because in the first episode of this fanfiction reading, I explained that there was the three different ones. There was the Bright Lights and Bumblebee, White Rose Tea, and Raindrops on Roses and whatever. So there was three essentially ones. Now I didn't necessarily explain what order, but essentially this one is a sort of companion to White Rose Tea, and the sequel, the Raindrops on Roses and Whiskers on Kittens. I decided to do this one specifically first because it is actually first, and only towards like the later part of this one do we essentially see the start of White Rose Tea, and then the last one, which I don't really want to say the name over and over again, the one about kittens and roses and whatever, is like full on afterwards of these two. So yeah, it's gonna do this first because whatever. Anyways, her face quickly split into a grin as she flicked the switch on the lamp, because he's kind of missing a letter there, beside her, making the room instantly dark, and slipped into unconsciousness. So, before we're so rudely interrupted by an ad, we'll move on to part 3. The sound of her alarm clock going off was more welcome than usual. She groaned, emerging tentatively from her covers, daring to expose her arm to the cold morning air to turn off the harsh beeping. She glanced over at Pierre's bed. Her roommate was sitting cross-legged, an open book of study notes in her lap. Morning. Hey. Now Blake was faced with a tough choice. Her lovely warm bed or Yang. She hesitated for a moment. Bed. She curled up and glanced at her alarm clock again. 7:01. As soon as it rolled over to 10 past, she'd get up. As soon as it rolled over to 10 past. 7:50. Shoot, 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 shoot. I think I got all of them. Blake sprung out of bed, wincing as the cold air made her far less comfortable than she'd have liked to be. Shut herself in the wardrobe, got dressed, leapt out, shoved her laptop into her backpack, ran her fingers through her hair a few times, adjusted her bow, and charged out the door. Pierre blinked a few times, trying to comprehend this. That's the fastest I've ever seen her move. She raced down the stairs, the thumping probably fumbled for her key and slammed most of her weight against the glass as she tried to get out as quickly as possible. She started running, glancing at her watch. 7:58. I can make it. Ugh. As the art school came into view, she spotted Yang's brilliant yellow hair, and heaved a sigh of relief. She stuck one hand in the air, waving, too breathless to call out. She heard Yang's yell of response, but she didn't catch what it was. She was too far away. She bent over, catching her breath as Yang jogged over. Hey. Morning, Blake panted, straightening up. Yang gave her a sympathetic look. Ate too early for you? Yeah, but don't worry, she said easily. Yeah. Brushing her fringe out of her eyes. Where are we going? Well, I thought we'd start with breakfast. With that, Yang grabbed Blake by the wrist, catching her off guard, and led her over to a motorcycle on the side of the path. Black and yellow. She grabbed a plain black helmet off the front and threw it at Blake, who only just caught it and strapped Blake stared down at the one in her hands, then slowly lifted it up, putting it on. Is this bike yours? Yep, this is Bumblebee. Blake cocked an eyebrow. You named your bike? Why not? She winked. We've been through a lot together. Have you ever been on a motorcycle before? Blake shook her head no. It's pretty logical. There are pegs where you can put your feet. Don't touch the exhaust pipe. Lean with me on the corners. Hang on to my hips. Got it? I think so. Yang nodded, satisfied, and swung herself onto Bumblebee, patting the seat behind her, signaling for Blake to follow suit. Blake relatively awkwardly caught on and placed her hands tentatively on Yang's hips. It struck her that this was the second time she ended up with her hand on Yang's waist, and she was surprisingly okay with it. It had been Yang's idea both times, after all. Yang finally started up the engine, and and they sped through the campus. It was far too early for most students to be out, so Yang didn't hold back, twisting the handle or something the faunus wouldn't really know, so that the engine let out a guttural roar. Blake had never felt the wind in her hair in her face like this. The way it tugged on her hair and clothes. The sun warmed her skin. What? The sun warmed her skin and made Yang's hair a dazzling gold. Blake wondered suddenly if she should have tied her hair back like Yang had, but she quickly decided she didn't mind if it tangled. She was enjoying herself too much to care. Adrenaline surged through her veins, and her heart, thudding hard, felt light as if it could burst out of her chest. She didn't find riding a motorcycle decelerated much faster than other vehicles, but despite the speed, Yang wasn't a reckless driver. The longer it went on, the more Blake noticed how predictable Yang was being. She drove as if she assumed other cars wouldn't see her, even if the only people on the almost deserted roads were professors wanting to get some work done early, navigating their way through the car parks. She was experienced, and Blake definitely believed her when she said she and Bumblebee had been through a lot. They pulled up outside a coffee shop on the far side of the large campus. Blake raised an eyebrow, and Yang simply said, "Breakfast." Blake had never been to this particular cafe, but she'd heard of it, and it opened up quite recently, and she knew a couple of older students at Beacon had some part-time or full-time jobs there. Uh, eh. Yang pushed the door open and stepped out to the counter, ordering a chocolate croissant. The person at the cashier, Coco, according not to her badge, all right, sure, looked able for Yang, then ducked away to heat up the pastries. Yang glanced around the shop. "Where shall we go?" Blake shrugged. "By the window it will do." Yang nodded and set down the number so that it could be seen clearly. It wasn't long before the croissants arrived. "So," Blake said slowly before taking a bite of her croissant, "what are we doing?" "Don't know." Blake sighed, glaring, feeling like she should have expected this. She wasn't sure if she was more ticked off about the fact that Yang hadn't actually planned anything, that she had been forced to get up at 8 o'clock, or that Yang had just spoken with her mouth stuffed full of food. Yang swallowed down the pastry, then explained, "I wanted you to choose. We've been to a party before which is more my scene, so I wanted to do something you enjoy." "Oh, that was sweet." Blake paused. What did she enjoy doing that didn't involve her nose being in a book? Um, there's plenty of um there's plenty of stuff nearby if you can't think of anything in particular. Ice skating, a movie, or we can stay on campus. So exactly. Blake paused, thinking. Ice skating didn't sound bad, but actually I wouldn't mind just walking around talking, or we could go to the library. I haven't explored their collection. Blake broke off as one of the staff came over, asking if they wanted a drink before they left. Yang glanced at Blake. "You decide." Sure, iced tea, please." "I'll have a hot chocolate." The waitress nodded and walked off, and moved off. Okay. Yang looked over at Blake again. "I'm all for the library, actually. I always mean to read more." "Wait, really?" "Yeah, I like romance books and crime." At the word romance, it's awfully like a date. He glanced at Yang. I think maybe. Could it be a date? Did Yang mean to do that? They continued to talk about various things, books, music, politics, but Blake was only half concentrating on the conversation, completely distracted by this bizarre possibility. The more she thought about it, the more likely it seemed to be. Why would Yang say that she couldn't stop thinking about her in those 2 years that had passed? 2 freaking years! And neither of them could forget someone they'd met for about half an hour. Blake was starting to doubt less and less that she liked Yang a lot. Uh, in fact, she'd been ready to admit that to herself for a long time. But could Yang like her back? What were the chances? Slim, yes, but there was so much evidence that it could be possible. Yang had actually put a fair bit of effort into his outing, remembering a helmet for Blake, having multiple backup plans, and coming to this particular place seemed deliberate, on top of doing what Blake wanted to do. But why? Why would she bother? Blake sighed. She refused one way or another. But by assuming this was a date, it was highly likely that she'd end up being disappointed. She jumped back suddenly as Yang waved a hand in front of her face. Hello, Blake? Ah, sorry, just zoned out. Yang nodded, placing her hands around her drink to warm them up. Fair enough, what were you thinking about? Blake paused. She didn't want to say schoolwork. She didn't want to say schoolwork. Yang might think she was bored with this. Just faunus rights and stuff. I mean, she glanced hastily around, feeling like she had to roll with this now. Her guilt growing as she lied. There isn't a single faunus working here, or anywhere really. You get all the jobs just because of your race. Yang's gaze softened. That's why you were at the boat then. Blake nearly heaved a sigh of relief. She hated lying like that, but it was definitely better than, oh, I was just wondering if you had any romantic attachment to me. Yang said slowly, I wouldn't necessarily blame Faunus for joining organizations like the White Fang. They're treated pretty badly. Blake raised an eyebrow. The White Fang is a terrorist group. I know, but if it were me, I'd want to fight. The cat Fauna shrugged. Violence isn't the answer. Yang nodded and took another sip of her hot chocolate. But at least you'd be doing something about what you believe in. Blake blinked. If you were a Faunus, you think you'd join the White Fang? Yang winced. I never said that. They're still criminals, but people have got to admit they have a decent motive. Murder is still murder. Yang waved her hand dismissively. Let's not talk about the White Fang. It's depressing. Blake nodded and sipped her tea. Very slowly. They decided to walk as nice they decided the walk was nice, so Bumblebee was left behind, so they would walk back, then ride back to the building full of Canadian students, whatever it was called. The Williams building, where Yang was. Blake wasn't sure if suggesting this was the best idea. Sure, if parties were Yang's domain, this was definitely hers, but she wanted Yang to have a good time too. At least I can get some actually work done. Lo and behold, romantic pro Blake built on at work. Not. So, Blake, do you expect there will be anything in this library you haven't read? Yang teased, nudging the faunus. Blake narrowed her eyes playfully. 50% chance. And what about you? Will there be anything in this library you have read? Yang winked. 50% chance. Oh, hang on. Yeah, Blake slowed her stride, looking back as Yang stopped under a blossom tree. The blonde leapt up, grabbing a branch off it. Grabbing a branch off it. Blake only just suppressed a laugh. How Lizzie Bennet of you. Yang frowned, confused, and Blake's eyes widened. She has a habit of picking branches off trees. Please don't tell me you haven't watched the BBC version of Pride and Prejudice. Wait, I haven't even read the book. Blake resisted a strong urge to facepalm, grinning. Yang, that's worse. Yang shrugged and handed her the tree branch. It was thick with pale pink blossoms. It's for you. Blake blushed a little. Oh, thanks. Why? Yang shrugged. Why not? Is this flirting? Yang bounded up the steps at the as the library came into view. Blake had been to a lot of libraries, but Beacon's was something special. The vice chancellor, which is kind of a weird way to say someone who's the leader of a school, but vice chancellor Powell, out of his way to invest in having the largest library of any university in the country. There was no way anyone could have read every book here, because the library had much more than books. It kept old newspapers, records, and such for student research. It had hundreds of paper books and thousands more digital ones students can access. Free access to documentaries, music for the music students, as Yang would quickly discover a series called Red vs. Blue, presumably for media studies. They scanned their ID cards at the front desk before being allowed to roam through the shelves. Oh my god. So, I don't know. It's very weird seeing as it's like they're essentially setting like this whole thing in like real life United Kingdom, which is quite funny. But, I'm not gonna worry about that anymore. Uh the pair exchanged a glance, then went straight for the fiction section. Yang quickly found a graphic novel. Blake wasn't about to criticize any graphic novels better than Twilight, unless it was the Twilight graphic novel, which made her want to throw up. While the fondest searched for some actual books to recommend for her, it wasn't long before a few relatively large piles formed. Yang gave Blake a quizzical look. There's no way I'm going to get through that. Blake shrugged, pulled up a beanbag for herself, then grabbed a random one off the top. They sat in silence for about 20 minutes before Yang finally asked, "Why do you like reading so much?" Blake didn't respond. Yang blinked, then leaned over, tapping her on the shoulder. "Blake, why do you like books so much?" Blake put the ceiling, resting her head on the bookshelf behind her. "I love the characters and the settings. I love being taken somewhere else. You get to see so many walks of life from so many perspectives." Yank frowned, "But it's all fictional." Oh, God. Blake sighed, then closed her book. "You know Jesus, right?" "Yeah, who... Yeah, who doesn't? Wait, you're not going to make me read the Bible, are you?" "God, no, nothing like that. But according to the Bible, he tried to teach people things by telling them parables, stories, right?" Um, Blake paused, like the Good Samaritan one. A lawyer asked Jesus who his neighbor was, and if he was meant to be kind to those people. Jesus replied with something like, "A Jew was beaten up and robbed by a group of criminals and thrown onto the side of the road, left to die. A priest passed him but didn't help. So did a Levite. Both of these people were individuals that the Jews listening to his speech would have regarded as noble because of their status, but they wanted nothing to do with a dying man. The priest didn't want to risk touching a dead person for trouble with the group that beat up the man in the first place." So all the Jews listening would have been thinking, "Oh, an ordinary Jew like us is going to come along and help him and be his neighbor." But it wasn't a Jew. It was Christians, and the Jews hated each other. They were enemies, but the Good Samaritan helped the Jews. Stuff, giving the Yang interrupted. "Wait, how do you know this?" "I went to a Catholic middle school. Our teacher was awesome. He explained things in a really funny way. Apparently Adam and Eve were really fond of vegetarian lasagna." "Oh, well, I wouldn't blame them. Do you believe any of it?" "No, not really." Anyway, that was Jesus' answer to the lawyer's question. So who was the Jew's neighbor? The other upper class Jews who would have left him to die, or his enemy who saved his life? The Samaritan. Right. So through a fictional story, Jesus was saying it's not about what group a person comes from. Everyone is your neighbor, even your enemy. So go do the same to them. That's why I like reading so much. The authors of all of these books, she gestured at the pile, have something to say that's worth listening to. Yang blinked, looking a little stunned. "Huh, wait, so was Jesus an author?" Plague shrugged. "Kind of." Yang frowned. "Wait, did Jesus write the Bible? Because that would make him like a bestseller." "Jesus didn't write the Bible." "Oh, okay, never mind." Blake rolled her eyes. "I take it you're not religious then." "Nope." Yang paused, then eyed the pile of books. "Which one should I read first?" Blake paused, grinned deviously, and then tossed her The Shining, a Stephen King horror book. Blake wasn't terribly affected by horror stories, but she knew other people found it terrifying. "Try this one. It demonstrates another thing I like about books. It makes you feel things." Yang raised an eyebrow. "Is this a feelsy war romance?" "Yep, The Shining. Because I know this great one by this Australian guy." "No, it's not a romance. This is something else entirely." "Oh, okay. Hey, do you mind if I go and do some research for a gender studies thing?" There was no reply. Blake tried again. "Yang? What? Oh, yeah, go ahead." Blake grinned and got up. When she returned, she was surprised to find Yang was still reading the horror book. In fact, while Blake got a considerable amount of work done, Yang just sat there in silence, reading. Blake could hardly believe it. She actually watched for a couple of minutes to see if Yang was turning the pages. Finally, she spoke. Blake? This is actually terrifying. Yang's voice, words on a page. It's not just words on a page. God, this is actually... Then she fell silent, reading again. Uh, uh, Blake smiled. She nearly jumped when Yang spoke again. Stephen King really does have terrible grammar. The sentence doesn't even have a full stop. Blake smiled. Yeah, but it's intentional. It mixes up the pace, replicating the choppy way in which we think when we're panicking. Writers are really clever people. Yeah, they are. The Shining was actually a really long book, at least 400 pages long, but Yang read all of it quietly, sitting there. She wasn't completely still. She changed her position a few times, and her thumb tapped on her knee during the scary bits, but Blake was impressed, really impressed. It had taken her a few days to read that book, but Yang was racing through it, and she wasn't half as well read, at least not to Blake's knowledge. But Yang, although not being a bookish person, appeared to be a fast, focused reader, unlike me. Finally, she heard the satisfying sound of a book closing. Yang glanced up at her. You know that feeling when you get when you walk out of a movie, like that what is the meaning of life kind of feeling? Yeah, this feels like that. Stephen King is a good writer. Huh? Huh. Which one next? Blake blinked. You're going to read another one. You're going to read another? Yeah, why not? I may as well borrow a couple too. There's no way I'm going to sleep tonight, like at all. Blake checked her watch. 4 hours had passed. 400 pages in 4 hours. She leaned over, examining the pile. Have you read The Book Thief? No, I haven't. It's brilliant. Try that one. About 3 hours and 300 pages later, Blake decided they should probably call it a day. Anne was pretty disappointed, but she borrowed 3 books with the intention of finishing them before the week was out. Blake was slightly shocked, but also slightly amused herself. She could go on and on about how dynamic and complex a fictional character could be, but she often forgot that real people were the same. Yang was much more than the extroverted partygoer that Blake thought she knew. She was also bright enough to get into Beacon. Perhaps it shouldn't have been such a surprise that she read it so quickly, as being able to do so would mean Yang could probably excel while doing a little less work than the rest of them. She appeared to be good at reading. Must have been very deliberate and thought through, right down to remembering a second helmet for Blake to use. Also meant that the goofy blonde cared. Blake smiled to herself as they left the library. Maybe she had found someone she could trust. Part 4 out of okay. I guess we only do have one more after this, but that still means doing more parts of this. No. See, I thought this would be like really short and I could get it done like really quickly, but when the chapters are super long, it's whatever. Anyways, part 4. They finally got back to Yang's room, collapsing onto the bed. Blake stared at the ceiling. That was actually great fun, and I got work done. We should do that again sometime. Definitely. I mean, I actually learned something. Yeah, what? Yang grinned deviously. That someone took religious studies way too seriously. Now, they felt quiet for a moment, both wondering where this was leading. Yang broke the silence. Hey, Blake. Yeah, can I teach you how to... Yeah. Can I teach you how to swing dance? Yeah. Why? Yeah, why not? Yang got up, pulled Blake off the bed, and put an arm around her waist. Blake had forgotten how much she was affected by this physical closeness. She told herself when she was simply in Yang's presence, but oh god, with Yang's arm around her waist like that, her stomach tied itself in knots, and the back of her neck burned. This is the closed position, Yang said quietly. It's a bit easier for me to lead like this. Is that okay? Yeah, it's fine. It's perfect. Yang swallowed hard and nodded. Okay, do you remember? Vaguely. You step back, don't you? Yeah, rock step. Which foot was it? Left. Blake nodded, her pulse racing. Yang didn't move. Do we need music or... Nah, I should be fine. Okay, rock step. It didn't take long for Blake to remember how to do this, but this time something seemed different. This time she was somehow more aware of Yang holding her, Yang brushing against her, Yang's breath on her cheek and neck. Everything was silent except for the rapid breathing and Yang murmuring rock step, triple step under her breath. The blonde's unusual eyes seemed alive, with deep reds dancing within them. Suddenly, Blake stumbled, losing track. You okay? Yeah, I'm fine. Blake finally dared to look at Yang, right at her. Yang gazed back silently. God, they were so close. Blake's hands were shaking and she felt incredibly warm all over. It wasn't terribly unfamiliar, but it was still terrifying, because she didn't know if Yang felt the same way. So much emotion laced Yang's expression. Blake could almost watch her fighting with herself, conflicting emotions fighting each other. Then she suddenly closed her eyes, her eyebrows knotted together, her head turned away. I'm sorry, I am. I just need to. Then Yang leant. Why is it? What is with the leant in and their lips met? The first thing Blake felt was shock, complete and utter shock. Sure, she's had her suspicions that Yang might be interested, but this was so sudden. She was so unprepared. She didn't know what to do, how to respond. His surprise, she pulling her hips. Yeah, had and up to Blake's back, spiraling deeper into the embrace. It felt so good, so right, but soon, for Blake at least, it felt unnaturally long. She pulled away and placed her head on Yang's shoulder, hugging her. Yang couldn't speak for a couple minutes. You actually, yeah. Then she laughed. She broke away from Blake's laughing, sitting down on the bed. She glanced up at Blake, looking amazed. From the moment I saw you in the corner at the concert, I wanted you to fall in love with me because I'm so bloody in love with you. Blake shrugged. It definitely worked. Yang blinked, her eyes still filled with wonder. Wow, that was stunning. Blake glanced shyly down at her feet. Can we do that again? Yang's eyes widened. Yes, please. Um, Real question is, this is where I want to stop it for now. Hopefully we can finish this in the next part. Next time, yeah, the third part of this. Oh boy.